Greetings. In our program today, you're going to learn some strategies that will show you how to navigate and actually prosper from the new rulings that have come out of a court case in Missouri, referred to as the Sitzer verdict, that's going to be transforming the way that real estate brokerage is done. So if you're thinking of buying a home, selling a home, or if you are in the business of real estate brokerage, you want to stick around because you're going to learn some key strategies that's going to teach you how to stay on top of your game and to prosper from all of these things that are going on. I'll see ya. Greetings and welcome to another edition of Business in Motion, a program that focuses on business and entrepreneurship from an Afro-centered perspective, right here on WMEG Radio, Baltimore, Maryland, the #1 station in the nation with the dissemination of valuable information with no hesitation or reservation, but only an obligation and a dedication to the elevation of your present situation. I am your host, RGL Biz Coach, and today we're going to be discussing the Sitzer ruling, and this happens to be a court case that was in the state of Missouri that's going to be setting a totally new precedent regarding the way that real estate brokerage charges commissions. And doesn't matter if you're interested in buying a home or you're going to be selling your home, or if you happen to be in the business of real estate, you want to stay with us throughout this program because you're going to learn some key strategies that's going to show you how to capitalize on this new ruling and walk away the winner of the game. So stick with us. I know you're going to love this program.
The all-new WMEG Radio.
And welcome back to the second segment of Business in Motion, a program focusing on business and entrepreneurship from an Afro-centric perspective. I'm your host, RGL Biz Coach, and I hope you were able to take in the excerpt that was explaining the juror's verdict regarding the Sitzer case. And let me just kind of give you some overview as to what's happening here. This is I don't know, depending on which side of the street you happen to be on is going to determine what you might feel about this. And I'm speaking as a professional in the business of real estate, I've been serving as a real estate agent, been and a realtor since, I keep forgetting, I don't know if it was 1979 or 1980, but just bottom line, a long time. Starting out in the San Francisco Bay Area, selling real estate. And I can say since then that it's been pretty much, there's been changes within the industry. However, from the perspective of commissions being paid, that is the brokerage fee, to a listing agent, I should say, or to the selling agent, it's been pretty much the same. Now, don't get me wrong, when I first started in the business for years, there was no such thing as a buyer's representation. Everybody was like, the home is actually listed. The selling agent, and when I'm saying a selling agent, let me clarify this. In a real estate transaction, when a home is being sold, you basically, and it's on the multiple listing service, you have two sides of a transaction. Each one, you have the listing side. The listing side happens to be the side where the agent contracts with an owner of a property to sell that property. So that's the listing agent. And then you have the buy side, or some refer to it as the sell side. And the sell side is totally different. When we're talking about the sell side, that happens to be the agent who's working with a prospective buyer who would write a contract for that property to be bought. Okay, now got that. So the way that it has been for eons is that the listing agent is the one who's contracted by the seller, and the seller would agree to pay a fee. Now, again, there's never been, any law or policy saying that I won't say there's no policy. There could be office policy, but for the most part, there's never been a set brokerage fee that a seller would have to pay. However, it's kind of understood that most agents would want to get somewhere around that 6%, and that's the way that it is now. A few years before I started, from my understanding, it was around 7% is what they would be paid. And later, it became around 6%. And even today, it's somewhere typically between 5 and 6% is what the seller will agree to pay to the listing agent. And when I'm saying the agent is just simply when there is a fiduciary. A fiduciary means there's a trust relationship between the real estate licensee to act on behalf of their seller. So now you got that set. So what will happen is the way that our industry is set up is we have what is called a multiple listing service. Now, you have access as a professional to the multiple listing service if you are a member of the National Association of Realtors. It grants you that right. These things kind of run together. And then also they're like, you got your state realtors like Maryland, and then, we have a local. I'm like in Prince George County, Maryland, so I belong to the Prince George County Association of Realtors also. But anyway, what I'm saying is when the home is listed, the seller will agree to pay a particular brokerage fee. Now, what we have to do, what has been added to the protocol, is that now you have to show what amount of that brokerage fee you're going to share with a cooperating broker or a buyer broker. And again, that buyer brokers happen to be for the party, to that particular agent who's working with the buyer who's going to sell it. And so in the multiple listing service, there's one field that we had to fill it in. And a lot of times it's split, evenly. Sometimes it might not. Sometimes it might be where, the broker might decide to highly incentivize the selling agent or the buyer's agent. So if it's a 6%, they might give that selling agent 3.5%, and the listing agent might take 2.5%. Or vice versa. The listing agent might say, okay, based on the amount of work I've got to do, and I'm the one doing the marketing and spending the money to get this property sold, out of the 6%, I'm going to take 3.5%, and I will share 2.5% with the selling agent. But regardless, it doesn't matter. That would have to go on the listing agreement. At least in the state of Maryland, it has to be shown on the listing agreement the amount of that commission that will be shared with the selling agent. And then that amount has to be placed in the multiple listing service. Now, what happens is when agents are researching homes that they're going to show to their prospective buyers, they can see how much they're going to be compensated from the seller. All right? But now, keep in mind, still as it is today, since this buyer representation has become a big deal in the buyer brokers, we have what's called a buyer brokers agreement. And so with the buyer brokers agreement, as an agent, when you're working with a buyer, you typically have that buyer complete and sign a buyer brokers agreement. And in that agreement, it states that you are working for a particular amount of money. Let's say 3% is the amount that you're working for as a buyer's agent. And that means that even if the property that your client happens to write a contract on and wins that contract is only paying 2.5% or something less than 3%, based on your buyer broker's agreement, the buyer would have to compensate and give you the difference between what the listing agent is giving, what the seller is paying, and what you're receiving. Okay, now you take that in, and this is kind of the pretext to where we're going. What happened a few years ago was a discount broker came into existence, and this discount broker happened to be down in Texas. And what was happening, because he was a discount broker, he was having to offer selling agents less. And instead of it being a typical 2 to 3%, from my understanding, I'm not down in Texas, but from my understanding, what was stated was that a lot of those commissions would be between maybe 1 and 2%. And when they're between 1% and 2%, what happens, the agent sees that. And sadly, a lot of the agents don't actually show those properties, okay? Or if they do, it might be the last one that they're willing to show. They're going to make sure that they show the other properties that where they know they're being incentivized to sell. They're going to be getting a higher commission than that one is only maybe showing paying 1%. And I'll just ask the question, I mean, if you put yourself in the realtor's shoes, what would you do? If you're looking at this and, okay, this one is only going to pay you 1%, and it has to be like one property out of a number, and the rest of them are paying 3%. Now, which one do you show and which one do you don't? Now, legally, your responsibility as the realtor is to show and to work for that buyer and to show them the property. Doesn't matter what the commission is, especially since there are buyer brokers agreements that come into existence. But it creates a problem. Let's say that it's only 1%, and so many times you have buyers, first-time buyers, and they barely have enough money to even make settlement. Because when they're making settlement, they have to pay their down payment, and then they have the settlement fees. And quite often in various markets, you're going to find it where sellers actually give a concession. I'll call it that, a concession to buyers to help the buyer so that they have enough money to come to the table. But now if it was that selling agent would have to rely on their client, the buyer, to come up with additional money to pay them, it's going to make it very, very tough. It's going to make it very tough. And I can just tell you, in most situations, those buyers probably don't have the money to be able to pay. So taking those things into consideration, it's always seemed to be very convenient that when this home is listed, that the seller would agree to pay the buyer agent's commission. But there's a problem. The problem now is that the seller is actually paying another agent who's advocating against the seller, and the seller is paying the fee. And this is where the big problem is. And I have to be honest with you, throughout my whole career, I've always questioned that. It's like this, wow, doesn't make the most sense in the world. It's like, okay, if I'm selling my home and I'm paying like 6% a brokerage fee, and 3% of that is going to go to the person who's representing the buyer who's buying my home, but yet that broker, that particular agent, is working on behalf of the buyer. They're negotiating. So in essence, what they're trying to do is to get the best deal that they possibly can. Now, there's a conflict of interest. That's where the conflict of interest arises, is because, how can you do both? So, if looking at, if I'm a juror and just listening to whatever the testimonies might have been and not understanding, maybe not have been in the business, I can easily see how they can say, wow, yeah, it does look like maybe the National Association of Realtors and the brokers did conspire to inflate home prices so that they could pay those brokers. And this is what it's all about. And so bottom line, this case where I'm telling you about with a discount broker, he kicked things off a while back with a lawsuit, and I won't even call their names, but some of these big brokerages, they said, look, we ain't even going to take it to court. We don't like the way this thing looks, okay? We'll settle out of court, and I know they settled for 55, 60, it was less than $100 million. They settled, okay? These other ones, in the Sitzer case, they didn't settle. They figured they would take it to court because, they're figuring, well, this is the way it's been for 50, 60, 70 years, it's going to go in our favor. If not, they're going to have to change the whole industry. But let me tell you this. They said it took less than, 2.5 hours in deliberation, and the jurors came back with a guilty verdict, okay? And that guilty verdict awarded $1.8 billion on one hand, some other damages, all totaling about $5.8 billion. And look, that's just getting started, because that's the small case. There's another one where they're bringing on for the entire nation, and they're saying that the payout on this one, they don't know where it's going to go, but I think the damages that are being sought are well in excess of $13 billion. Now, That case that was in Missouri set a precedent. And they said as soon as the jurors came back, lawsuits started being filed all over the place, these copycat lawsuits, because now those lawyers know that they can get paid some big money simply because the precedent has already been established. It's been established in the Sitzer case. And so you got to, where this thing is going to go, I don't know. Nobody really knows. But that's what's going on. And so you got realtors now who are totally upset. They're saying as a result of this, that within the next couple of years or so, 80% of all realtors will be out of business. They're going to be gone. Simply because they don't know where to go with. And again, you keep in mind, this is based on their knowledge right now. This is something that just shook up the whole industry. I mean, it kind of reminds me back in the day when I was working for AT&T when they were the big boys. They control all the communication that was in the United States, and they were taken to court by this one small guy, and they laughed at him, saying nothing's going to happen. And the courts ruled against AT&T, and as a result, AT&T had to divest. Well, again, here we go again, the same thing, but it just happens to be with the real estate industry this time. And so, I can tell you, there's going to have to be a lot of new innovations coming into existence today. The big question is, how is this going to be handled now? Because if you just ask the question, how much would a buyer willing to pay an agent to take them out? Now, a lot of times due to the new technology going online and buyers being able to do their own research, a lot of times the buyers are finding the property themselves and saying, okay, look, they'll tell their agent, I want to see these properties this weekend or wherever it might be. But they have done their own research, and they know, because today a typical buyer has access to almost as much information as the realtor does. All right? So now the big question is, how much is this buy? If it ends up where the sellers are not going to be paying for the buyer's agent, and that buyer's going to have to pay, how much is a buyer willing to pay to the agent is one of the big questions. And that's going to have a major impact, in the industry, because what I'm telling you, just from my knowledge, most buyers don't have a lot of money, especially if they're first-time buyers. They just don't have the money to be able to pay on top of their down payment and their normal settlement charges. So what has to happen is you've got to start looking at, the industry will have to look at more creative ways of doing the business. And I want to lay some of them out right now. Okay, if you happen to be in the business, get your notebook. All right. And first of all, I can proudly say that I was aware. It just happened to be that an organization that I'm with that does a lot of marketing and training were on top of this. And I was making a lot of other agents aware of what was coming. And some of them looked at me and said, no, you got to be nuts. It can't happen. You know what I'm saying? This is the way it's been. This is the way it's going to be. And now they're staring it in the face. But anyway, one thing that I'm expecting to come into existence is that buyers are going to have to ask the lender to pay or to finance the fee to pay the agent. They're going to have to be an agent involved, because a buyer can't. I mean, it is difficult, even if you're in the business, trying to keep up with all the rules and legalese and everything. I mean, we've got so many. Just to write a contract today, you're talking 60-some pages. And I'm telling you, many of the agents, they don't even know what half of it is talking about, much less just a regular layperson trying to write a contract. So they're going to need an agent. So what I'm saying is, I think the smartest thing to do would be that the lending industry changes it. It needs to change its policy and allow for those commissions to be paid so that their agents can be compensated. Otherwise, it could end up being a big mess. Okay. Now, number two, there are going to be so many other new business opportunities in the real estate brokerage field. There's no doubt about that. And some of them I kind of welcome. You understand? Because, again, I see where the jurors are coming from. And as I mentioned, years being in business, it's never made sense to me that I should be paying. If I'm the seller, I should be paying for someone to advocate against me. They're working against my best, to make sure that another person gets the best from me that they possibly can. That means I'm losing. You know what I'm saying? So that's never made any sense. But I can view this thing from those jurors' perspective. Okay, all right. You can, okay, with this, excuse me. Okay, realtors, I think another thing what they need to do is to kind of go a la carte regarding services that are being rendered. And when I'm saying a la carte, and this is kind of like some of the discount brokerages, there's some who've already done this, but to break it down. So in other words, let's say you're working with a buyer, and the buyer's done their own research and they know the properties that they want to see. You can come in and start to function more so maybe like the legal profession does, okay? And when I'm saying the way the legal profession does, typically when you hire a lawyer to work for you, the lawyer gets a retainer up front. I can see this coming into existence, and see, I don't look at it as all bad for real estate and for realtors. I think there's going to be a lot of positivity, and the reason I say this is because there's so much work that realtors do that they don't get paid for. But the general public doesn't see that. They just don't know that. But it's, I mean, like too much work. And then when they're out showing properties, they have to burn their gasoline, going to this house, to this one, and you know what I'm saying, getting copies, documents done, hours and hours, tons of work that is done, and they don't get compensated unless they put a property on a contract, and then that contract has to make settlement. So what I'm suggesting, anybody, if you're in the business out there, is what needs to be brought into existence, especially if sellers will not be able to compensate selling agents, is that you start to charge a retainer. This retainer could be something similar to maybe $1,000 up front. And check this one out, $100 an hour, or $125 an hour, $200, depending on how well you are at your craft, you know, as a real estate agent. And if you're really good and you can show value, you can probably get that. But you could be able to get that retainer, you can get an hourly rate, or you can set just one particular rate, and it could be based on a percentage, and the retainer and also the hourly rate could be subtracted out of it, okay, at the end. This way what happens when you're a real estate agent and you're doing all of this mundane work, and all the things that you typically haven't gotten paid for, now you can be compensated for that work, in which I think agents should be. And what's going to happen again, if a lot, and again, they have projected 80% of real estate licensees are going to go under. They're not going to renew their license. They're in shock. But if that is the case, what's going to happen, the ones who've been making a living, because it's like anything else, you got the 80-20 rule. 80% of the business is done by 20% of the people. And so, you know, if you get rid of 80%, there are probably too many realtors out here anyway. I think in a lot of jurisdictions, 1 out of every 5 persons is a realtor. You know, has a real estate license, so there are too many. The barrier to entry is not that high. It's relatively low to become a realtor or to become a real estate licensee. And a lot of them probably just need to go, and they need to up the standards so that the industry becomes even more professional. And by becoming more professional, now you can start to name your you know, how you want to be compensated coming from these buyers, where you're not affecting that seller anymore. The seller no longer is responsible for paying that fee. All right. Now, here's another one. When an offer is being made, you've got to negotiate. There's some negotiations being done. What sellers do anyway, and many times, is they do give that concession. And when you have the seller, and it should be the seller's right if the seller wants to give a concession or not, but rather than showing, let's say, for instance, 6%, where 3% is being paid to the selling broker, what if 3%, the seller said, okay, look, I'm really motivated. I want my property to be sold. I want people to see it. So what I'm going to do, I will give the buyers a 3% concession. In other words, 3% of the price of the home, the same that would have been going to the broker, instead of giving it to the broker, give it to the buyer. Now the buyer can do what the buyer wants to do with that 3% commission. Same thing. You just switch some things around, call it something differently, and you keep moving. You just keep moving with business. So what else we got right here? Sellers, okay, providing concessions to defray the costs. That's what we're talking about. Yeah, oh yeah, check this one out. Check this out. What if a percentage of the difference between what a property is listed for and to really have that selling agent on his toes, really doing the best that they can, that selling agent says, here's what I can do for you, Mr. Client, Mr. and Mrs. Client. All right? I'll get a $1,000 retainer. Well, don't worry about the hourly rate. But what I'll do is you can give me 30%, 35%, 40%, whatever it might be of the difference between what the home is being listed for, what it's on the market for, and what I'm able to negotiate for you. So in other words, let's say the property is on the market for $550,000. And as a selling agent, I'm able to negotiate a sales price, a final contract ratified price of $500,000. There's a $50,000 difference. Now I've gotten my $1,000 retainer, but I'm saying now, in addition to the $1,000 retainer, I'm going to take 30% of the $50,000, which happens to be $15,000. So in this particular case, again, the retainer could be subtracted from it, but what this allows for that selling agent to do is to walk away without being hurt, walking away with the same amount of money that they typically would have gotten in either one of these cases that I just mentioned. And going back to number one, and that is where the lender actually finances the fee for the selling agent. That's one way. And number two, this one that the other one, number two, was getting the hourly rate, getting the retainer, a combination, and then with this last one. And I really like this last one because this will allow agents to really, like I'm saying, I typically work with I work the listing side, so I'm not so much affected by a lot of this that's going on. However, if I could get a percentage of what I'm able to save my buyers, I might be willing to switch back and work the other side too, because I would be negotiating my butt off. I'm telling you. So again, if you're in the industry out there, look, it ain't all bad. It's just you got to have a little creativity, and things are going to be changing. And these are just some things, like I say, I'm low on the totem pole. You know what I'm saying? I'm waiting for the big brains to come in and see what they're going to come up with. But these are things that I can think of right here as to how you manage the new laws that are going to be coming into existence, the Sitzer case, the result. Because already places like in New York, I know they're already saying that they're going to make it, they're going to prohibit it where a seller cannot even pay the seller can't pay for the buyer's agent, period. What they're looking at right now is saying, if it is not your client, you can't receive any compensation. All right, so this is big. And I'm telling you, again, I know it's super big, and still people are waiting right now for this new verdict. And I don't think that's going to be until sometimes summer of 2024, but the big one is coming. And I'm telling you, it's going to take out some companies, so get ready. That's all I can say, but hopefully you've gained from this. So let's get ready to take our next break. And again, stick around, because coming back in the spotlight, I've got Mr. Eric Garvan, and he's going to be talking about financials and a number of other things. So stick around. Let's get ready to go to this break. And who you're going to hear? Oh, yeah, by the way, let me just say that other break that you did, you got to hear some Earth, Wind & Fire. I figured I don't really have to say it, but I'll say it anyway because everybody knows EWF. But coming up, who we got coming up right here? We're going to be doing a song that I used to really feel this right here back in the day by my main man Larry Carlton, and this is called Sleepwalk. I'll see you as soon as we're back. Ciao, ciao.